Hi, good evening, and welcome to yet another episode with Unsuited. This is our sixth episode, and our guest today, fortunately for us on the occasion of Guru Purnima, is a teacher. He's a professor. He's someone who was awarded the Rhodes Scholarship, a huge honor, and then went off to study at Oxford. He also wrote his PhD there to eventually come back to India to help contribute to the Indian legal education system. He is also a fairly well published author. He's gone ahead and written some books and also published papers. He's also co-founded a Center for Law and Policy Research. He's none other than the Vice Chancellor of NLSIU Bangalore, Professor Dr. Sudhir Krishnaswamy. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And wish you a very happy Guru Purnima.
Thank you.
Hi, Vikas.
Hi, Tanisha. Hi, Sudhir.
Hi, Vikas.
Okay. So, for the Unsuited, we're going to go back a few years to kind of your childhood time. So, just tell us a bit about your background and your formative years studying in India, and also importantly, why did you choose to study law at university?
So because I was born and brought up in Bangalore and grew up through the schooling system here, went to some of the, at least at that time, preferred convent schools in Bangalore. And as I finished up my 11th standard, I like many others, chose to do a science 12th standard. And I knew by about the 11th standard that I wasn't going to IIT or to a medical school. It was clear to me that required a certain level of competence and abilities. That was not me, and I knew that I was very interested in reading and interested in history, interested in reading more nonfiction than fiction at the time. And so it seemed to me that I should go off and try and get a degree in the social sciences and the humanities. And the National Law School had been set up a few years, 5 years before my time. And we knew that if we weren't going off and trying to get into some of the top colleges in Delhi, that we'd do well to get into the National Law School. Just about the best social sciences, humanities degree. So at that time, it was not like law was the primary driver. It was not like I was thinking that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I knew what that meant. I also suppose it's before the time that popular law serials made it to Indian TV and, now, of course, streaming services. So at that point, I was pretty sure that I wanted a good degree. And that's what took me to the law school. And then I wound my way into law.
Okay. And then obviously, you kind of completed your law degree, and you then have the kind of options of, what other students and peer group would have done in terms of taking your legal career further in India. But instead of pursuing a law as a career at that point, you applied, won a Rhodes Scholarship, and went to study at Oxford. The kind of things that dreams are made of, especially for students from India. And I think you're one of the first of your kind of peer group and batches to have done that. So tell us why you chose that option to kind of apply for the scholarship, go off to Oxford, and what kind of impact that had on you.
So choosing the Rhodes Scholarship, I suppose I should give some credit to a couple of my seniors at NLS who had already gone off and done this with Lavanya Rajmani and Sandeep Gopalan. So we, at least for some of us, we knew that such an option existed. So that, did we fancy ourselves as getting the scholarship? Not really. At that point in time, NLS was hardly on the higher education map. And so we were in some sense outsiders, folks at where top Delhi colleges would walk through almost every year with the Rhodes and INLAC scholarships, and so we came in a little bit from the outside. Why did I apply? I applied almost by chance. I think it just about made the deadlines. I think now there's a very elaborate reference and grooming network around these scholarships. And at that time, this was almost the early days of the internet. We had very little information of this sort. We just about navigated that space. What difference did it make? Of course, is a much bigger question. At that point in time, I wasn't thinking about academia and further studies. I had not applied anywhere at that point. And so then the scholarship comes along and I changed track. I thought I would be a litigating lawyer, and that's pretty much what I had prepared myself for. It was the 5th year of law school. And then here I get the scholarship, and now I start rethinking what might happen next. And as it turned out, it was the BCL, which is the Bachelor of Civil Laws degree at Oxford. And that's where I went. What difference did it make? It made all the difference, because as it turns out, I chose to stay this path. And I stuck with academic work across the next 20 years. And so here I am, not having practiced in court a day. Maybe a second career, but for the moment, the roads fork made a lot of difference and explains in some ways why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Okay, and then obviously you did your BCL for a couple of years, and then you decided to come back to India and then look at developing a career in academia here. Again, another kind of unusual route, which not many would have taken, especially because you would have had many options in the UK itself, probably in academia, definitely in consulting. There would have been many people, many different career and definitely more lucrative options available to you. So why that kind of then decision to then say, I'm going to come back to India and Bangalore, to join academia here?
So, through my first year at the BCL, and I did the 2-year BCL, I still kept nursing ambitions to become that litigating lawyer that I was hoping to do when I graduated. It was somewhere between my first and second year that I decided that I would give academics a shot. And for me, it was clear that most of my peers were already lining up applications to study in the US or to study further somewhere in the UK or further in Oxford. And I was clear that the academic path I was interested in was in India. And for the simple reason that I could tell that this kind of effort and rigor would make a huge difference here. And if students are capable and motivated, the question is, can we deliver this kind of effort in India? And so I punted on that, and I said, let's give this a shot. And I decided I'll come back and try teaching, which, as Indian universities and colleges, what we seem to absolutely take as baseline is teaching ability. Whether you research and write is seen as a sort of almost a plus, right? So I wanted to confirm that I could teach and teach well, and hence the decision to come back. India, it was at least with respect to this, there were not many people who had set the path. So I had to kind of navigate that path myself and figure out what might work.
And I know Dinesh is going to come in and say, but why academia? Because again, that's very rare that, especially someone so young, you're probably in your early 20s, mid-20s. And again, your peer group would have been going on to, like you said, from Oxford to academia or legal careers or consulting careers, earning a lot of money. Your peer group from LLS would definitely have joined law firms, or in-house, or become litigators. What was it about academia? What was it about academia, that you said that made you choose that path?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Magic Circle law firms, the big consultancy firms, they make career options very appealing and obvious to young graduates. And so academia seems like a bylane, that most people would just give up on and move away. So I suppose the one factor was undoubtedly Oxford. So you see what focused intellectual work is like. And you see people who are at the top of their field, and that's motivation. But also, I suppose one makes some sort of self-assessment where you get drive and energy from. And in my case, I was pretty sure that reading and writing and doing it rigorously and carefully mattered, and it's something that drove me. So I knew that it kind of, I guess it's a question of matching personality with career. I mean, you kind of have to figure out what works for you, or what you can do for sustained periods, long periods of time. Whatever else the BCL is quite a demanding law degree. So you're spending a lot of time in libraries, and you're spending a lot of time reading dense materials at large volumes. And I suppose at the end of that, you know this is working for you or it isn't, and it's a good way of finding out. It's sort of a deep end immersion, and my learning from that was whether it was the people I saw, the senior faculty I saw at Oxford, or the work itself. Both ticked the boxes for me. I said, this works. I can do it. The India part was the tougher bit, because that part I didn't know, right? I mean, I couldn't say how one navigates that part. But the intellectual academic part, I was a little more convinced by at that time.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump in, and I'm curious to ask here that, you said academia you were sure of. The India part, like you just said, that was a bit of a space that you needed to figure out. In a country like India, and we've all known this, that, teachers, there's a tendency for teachers to probably not be paid, adequately or given, there's a lot of respect, sure, but I'm not sure if there's enough sort of rallying around the profession that happens in a country like India. We have a tendency to take our teachers a little bit for granted. Did you feel like that was true even when you started your career as a teacher?
I think. I mean, you started this show by mentioning Guru Purnima, and I think that as a culture we have symbolism around teaching, but we don't have institutional structures that follow through on that symbolism, right? So it's a non-obvious choice in many ways, and it still remains a difficult choice for a lot of talented young people, because our institutional structures, which are supposed to be places for intellectual and academic work, are not grounded in that, right? So they either become very quickly crassly commercial, or they become very dull and boring places, and we're stuck between these two, where people get paid fairly well, but there's a highly commercialized sense of the educational vocation. And places that may not pay very well, but have a very dull view of what that everyday practice of teaching and learning is. And both of these don't work, right? So we need to find something, we need to find basically spaces that nurture young minds. And if you want teachers to come back in good numbers, that's what we need.
Which I'm sure this nurturing environment that you speak of, you've definitely seen in the universities that you've studied at overseas. So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, in the teaching profession, unlike in regular corporate jobs or even at law firms, there's no real distinct hierarchy, right? We don't have bosses. You don't join a law college or a law school as professor and someone says, okay, you report into XYZ now, So when you're kind of, they're all your peers. They may be better or lesser educated than you. They have lesser or more experience than you. So how do you really, is it largely a lot of self-motivation that kind of helps you navigate this space? And how does one go about working in a structure where there's no clear hierarchy really?
Yeah, I think that most universities, and universities that are well run, are, you should treat at least the faculty in a university as a sort of society of fellows, right? They're all peers. They don't report to each other in any formal sense. Having said that, people have spent longer years and shorter years in the profession, so that some sort of natural professional hierarchies might develop. But the situation in India was quite different, Anisha, because far from professional and seniority type hierarchies, we had deeply feudal structures, right? The universities in India are driven by very strongly feudal arrangements around teaching faculty. So while in an ideal sense, we should have flat fellowships of faculty, in a practical sense, we have quite sharp-edged feudal hierarchies of both of honor and status and respect that young people are expected to kowtow to in the early part of their careers and later too. But so the Indian system, it doesn't help that we don't have the institutional structures that pour a lot of resources and money behind the profession of teaching. And then B, we have these kinds of feudal, barriers in some sense. Neither of this, I mean, it's not a good cocktail. And we would do well to eliminate both, right? We put in better salaries and more nurturing environments at the same time. And part of my interest in what I do is to try and do that.
Understood.
And then, so like you mentioned, you've been in academia 2 decades now. So it's like 20 years already.
Yes.
What's been like some of the most fulfilling parts of that?
I mean, I suppose there is the termly cycle of engaging courses and particular classes and teachers. When you do that, so I'm just at the end of a term, right? So you have some sense of how people have traveled in this process, and I think as a teacher, one takes some pride in the sense of achievement from just that. But apart from that, I suppose the most remarkable thing one would say is how far has Indian legal education traveled? I've been in Indian legal education at an exciting time, right? In 20 years, we have gone from a relative backwater to popping our head up to be taken seriously. Today, there are my peers around the world are professors in some of the best universities in the world. Now, this was not happening in India 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It was happening in some other fields, mind you. We have star economists, right, as you know, all over the world. And we have some star scientists, but we've never had star legal academics. And today, you're seeing that across the world. You're also seeing an above average delivery of legal education in India. The National Law University experiment is one. Many other experiments in legal education are emerging and growing. So I suppose in a broad institutional sense, it's exciting that we've got this far in legal education in the last 20 years. In a personal sense, the sustaining and nurturing of small experiments in legal education reform, making some institutional change happen is very, very exciting and fulfilling. But the core of it has got to be the sort of daily practice of teaching and learning and graduating cohorts over a period of time. I guess that's the core fulfillment.
Yeah, and I think the cohort you're finishing at the moment would have been interesting and challenging because it would have been all digital the last term. So that would have been an interesting experiment.
That's right. I mean, so at least they've had the better part of 4.5 years of regular in-person learning. I feel for the batches that have just come in because, within 3 months or 4 months, they're all off and they're learning digitally. I mean, the only upside and the positive way of looking at it is maybe it's a part of what the future profession is going to be like, a distributed, digitally heavy profession. And so maybe we're preparing our students for this way ahead of time. And, I'm very happy to say that we're doing it in a way that is comparable to any institution anywhere in the world.
Wow.
So today I feel like, when I graduated from the National Law School, whether it was in terms of library resources or materials that we had for our students, there was a distinct sense that we were behind the curve. And I suppose today, most young graduates have no such sense because whether you're studying in North America or studying in Western Europe or anywhere else, Australia or Singapore, our students are pretty well placed in similar situations, similar environments, despite the COVID pandemic. And I'm quite happy to say that.
That's brilliant. And obviously the last 20 years and the ride would not have been easy. So you've mentioned the kind of fulfilling parts and the fact that you can contribute so much to people and students at the end of the day. But there would have definitely been some tough challenges that you would have had over the last 20 years, and especially when you joined in 2000 initially. So what are some of the kind of tougher challenges of the career in academia that you've had to go through?
No, I suppose the really tough part of Indian legal academia has been the getting in, and then once you get in, to stay the path. And I'll describe it in just these two ways. I had no red carpet rolled out for me at the National Law School. You might think, and you mentioned the Rhodes Scholarship and Oxford and all the bells and whistles, and you might imagine that NLS would be very hospitable. And what I can tell you is that at that point in time, these were not the priorities for the institution. This is not what they were looking for. And so getting in into the formal public legal education system is not easy for starters. So once you get in, you've got to stay the path, right? And I suppose that so let me put it like this. So I got in with a very minor contract when I started off in NLS, not something that most peers would have even accepted. I stayed it. I stayed through. It was not like I had some elevator path. It's not like because I did my job well or sincerely or whatever else, that somehow I get an accelerated path. That's not the way legal education is structured, right? So every part of the way was a sort of small incremental progress. And so I feel that the challenges that most people would face in the public system, at least, is that you have to find a way that you can sustain yourself through this rather longish period. And for that, I mean, it can't be. I don't think that money can be the driver, because I think one sort of makes up one's mind that you're not. That you're not going to be say a top 10 percentile earner. That might be okay, but you've got to get the rest of it to work for you. The teaching and the learning, the reading and the writing, publishing, maybe non-monetary recognitions of various sorts. And we need to do better like that in legal education in India. But any young person thinking along these lines has got to brace for a good period of time where, at least to the external world, not much is happening.
I know you mentioned, obviously, it's where it was in 2000, where it is now. It's worlds apart in terms of how the institutions have grown, and you've got peer groups, peers across the world teaching. I mean, you've got Obakant, in Singapore, who's another kind of big name peer that's doing well in the world of legal academia. But what can institutions here in India do more of to evolve and strengthen, and especially to encourage more young talent to join them? So what kind of advice would you give to institutions?
I mean, since I'm a young person in as a VC, I shouldn't be the one giving advice. But here's my take. I'll just tell you what I'm doing, and maybe some of this is worth trying to emulate. I think the key is to make a bet on young people and think about institutional pathways looking 10, 20 years out. So we have gone through in the last 7-8 months a robust round of recruitment, and I'm very proud of the 9 people we made offers to, and all of them are very good and accomplished in their fields, very well educated. And what I worked hard, and I must say I found support of my stakeholders to do this, is to make sure that every one of them has come in on a solid contract and is also paid well relative to the public scales. And today, under the 7th Pay Commission scales, it's not bad at all. It's not what it was in 2000. And so my sense is that I think that all institutions have got to make this kind of wager, right? We've got to make a bet on young, talented people who are self-motivated and in academia for the right reasons, but who simply have delivered and have accomplished something. And it doesn't really matter where they come from beyond that. As long as they've got a good educational background, they read and write well, they're interested and motivated in teaching, we should bet on these young people. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And I suppose if institutions across India did that for the next 5 years, Indian legal education will take a very sharp upturn.
And obviously you're in, you have, kind of in the driving seat at NLS. You joined in as a young academic. You went through the tough times, understanding the experience. You've also got a lot to learn from your own personal journey about what can be done better. And now it looks like you're implementing some of that already, at NLS. Are you seeing those kind of trends also across the other legal institutions around the country?
I noticed that most, one understands that most, at least in the NLU environment, the National Law University environment, that most vice chancellors are motivated and are interested in making their university grow and do well. So I suppose that at least in the NLU environment, one should see a fair bit of this. The old public university law department environment, I'm less aware of, and I think they have further constraints, and maybe they're not moving quite as fast. But in the NLU environment, I can see it. I can also see it in some private universities. So in some private universities, you can see a push in this direction. And so I suppose all said, I don't know when this all gets shaken up, how things will look, say 10 years from now. But I think that the direction, at least in a third of the relevant institutions, is pretty good.
Okay, super. And obviously, you mentioned about the next decade or so. So from your kind of, if you could vision out, the next decade, you've seen what's happened. You've seen the challenges that have been overcome in the last 2 decades. But what do you anticipate being some of the key challenges and opportunities for the legal academic system in India over the next decade or so?
So I don't know about new challenge. Let me speak about the challenges of legal education of the profession, right? So the profession, so the Indian legal profession is very differently structured than, say, the UK or the US. So the UK and the US would, or Singapore for that matter, would have a very tight gate to even get in, right? So to become a legal professional would be very difficult. But once you got in and you earned your stripes, you were assured of a reasonable income and professional respect. So the Indian legal profession is very differently structured. It's a very wide gate. Anybody can get in, almost. Just about anybody who's motivated enough to put themselves through a 3-year law degree can get in and get registered and become a lawyer. The real struggle starts after that, right? How do you make your mark in the profession and carve out a space for yourself? And their opportunities are very lopsided. So, we have the old structures of family and kinship, and we have the new structures where the new NLU systems churn out law graduates who kind of get a ladder or an escalator up the system. So my sense is that is the structure of the legal profession. And so the challenge for legal education is really to put out a higher percentage of graduates who can take the escalator. If the legal education system keeps churning out large volumes of lawyers who are not getting, they're not making their way up the legal profession in any systematic and even personally useful way, then I think that the legal education system is stuck, right? So I think this is the kind of monster challenge for the legal education system. Can we up the quality of what we do such that at least a standard living wage and a basic start that you were assured once you graduated and enrolled, that you can make a decent start in the legal profession. Now, for an elite school like ours, we have a sort of abundance of riches, roughly. Our students have many options. But I think the structural transformation of legal education is to really broaden out those advantages and to make sure that that is spread out. And let me just say that if we were able to do that with 30-40% of those who graduated with a law degree, that the day they stepped out into the legal profession, they commanded a reasonable wage and a structured opportunity to get ahead. This would be fantastic change in the next decade and a half.
Okay. I'm going to take a question from the audience that's related to that before we skip back to the questions we did. We've got Debarga Roy saying that the case law method taught in law schools is an archaic method of teaching law. They train law students for conventional courtroom professions. Law no longer remains within that realm. We have legal academia, public policy analysts, etc. Do you think the way we impact legal education needs to develop?
So I suppose that when NLS was initially created in 1989, the case law method had relative novelty in Indian legal education, which was more used to standard lectures, a commentary method style of teaching, where you essentially taught the statutes and a few cases. So there was some novelty to just using case law and hypotheticals. But in the NLUs and in NLS, for sure, we moved way beyond that. And we moved way beyond that even by the mid-90s. So even when I was a student, we were already using a much wider range of materials, both in terms of academic materials, journal articles and others, but also in terms of case studies, going beyond just case law, also working with complex texts and the ways of creating complex documentation. So we were doing all of this stuff, simulations, drafting, dealing with transactional law way back in the 90s. And if anything, over the years, these practices have grown in NLS. So I suppose that a fair description of the current state of affairs is that we use these diversity of methods. If anything, I mean, there was in the 2000s, one of my predecessors, Professor Mohan Gopal, used a broad sort of expression. He said, let's focus on an experiential education, right? Push people more out into the field and more out into work environments. And there was a push in that direction in the 2000s. And I suppose that the challenge remains for us to do that in more intensive ways. But the case law method is a fair description of how maybe some courses work. But the NLS method certainly is much more eclectic and wider than that.
Oh, super. And then just going back to the focus on students and making them workforce ready, and you're saying, bringing a level of equality across students that are graduating each year to get a fair paycheck, etc. What are your thoughts on how students and the education system can evolve to deliver a more workforce ready graduate?
So I think that there are two ways this can happen. This can happen by all of the law colleges upgrading and just running a better classroom learning experience. Another would be that, and this is something that at NLS we're working quite hard at, though we've not made any public announcement about, is to take the online education part very seriously. So I think that one important way for us to meet our mission, the National Law School was set up to be a pioneer in public legal education, right? And to respond to that mission at scale. I mean, we run hyper-selective programs, so very few people are going to get into these programs, even if we expand these programs. But maybe the way we can do it at scale is to offer online education or hybrid education in more stronger ways. And this is something we're working at intensely at the moment. And hopefully even in the year 2021, we'll see some of those results. But I would say in the medium term, we should have a relatively large offering on the online education side. I think that part, online/hybrid education, will take care of some part of this. If we don't do it like that, we'll have to do it by all of these law schools really, kind of reforming themselves and and offering a making a more sophisticated offering. And the kind of institutional incentive game that needs to be resolved by the time, say, 30-40% of the law schools reform the way they work is quite daunting, even to imagine and conceptualize. So I think those things are going to take time. But if your question is sharply about workforce ready, right? So I think that one thing that I'll use an example, and maybe this will be easier to think about, right? So today, let's say that there's a young law graduate in some part of rural Madhya Pradesh who wants to know what it means to effectively draft a non-disclosure agreement. Where would they go to learn this? Obviously, they could have learned it in their law school. Maybe their law school has taught them this. Maybe it hasn't. What if we were able to offer them at relatively low prices? Now, and I'm really saying, I don't want to talk numbers, but I'm talking about relatively low prices. Simple modules where people can work with documents, learn what these documents mean, actually practice drafting them in real time, and improve careers. Now, we don't have a continuing legal education credit system yet mandated in the legal profession, but I think these kinds of learning opportunities are learning opportunities that will pay themselves in the market. We don't need regulatory permission. We probably will just get market recognition for doing these programs. And so the way I'm thinking about this challenge is that we respond to people who are already graduates of law and give them the opportunity to self-learn along pathways that they create for themselves. Just responsive to where they are. And maybe if they don't need non-disclosure agreements, maybe they need, agricultural warehousing agreements. And if we can work through what those kinds of pledge and collateral arrangements might be, we'd be doing a huge service. We can't do this through an on-campus program, right? On-campus programs will always be limited in scale and reach. But my sense is the serious intervention that National Law School can make in professional learning is in this way.
Well, that sounds really interesting. The fact that you're looking at that whole concept of continual learning, upskilling, refreshing across the whole journey of a legal professional, not just someone in their 20s, but even later in their career as well. So that's quite an interesting thing that you're working on, actually. That's stuff you see internationally, where you can go and upskill and do courses over time. But that's an interesting thing to look at in the India perspective. Is there anything you can see in terms of gaps between? It's not just legal, but many professions and many employers will always say when graduates come out, there's a mismatch between what the the student coming out and what they need to be job ready in terms of work-related skills. So are there kind of skills that you've more kind of maybe less technical, like legal technical? Are there areas that you're working on, or you can see gaps that need to be plugged to make them more kind of workforce ready as well?
So here's my I've thought about this at length, and I'm quite comfortable because with the way the British professional education system responds to this challenge. They make it quite clear that universities are good at teaching students first principles, teaching students to think conceptually and to think analytically about a field of law or allied fields. But when it comes to learning what it takes to make the profession tick, you're much better off doing it in a professional setting. And my sense is, even as far as we go, interfacing with the profession through internships and extended engagements, we can only go that far. And I would not overpromise on that count. I think that the legal profession and law firms should be happy if we send them graduates who are well educated in fundamental ways. And by that, I mean, they know how to work the law. They have a conceptual architecture in their heads, which connect the various fields of law, and they know how to think through actual real world situations using these conceptual maps. if we do that, and we also, I hope, if we teach our students humility and perseverance and hard work, then we've done our job, you know. And I think that the law firms, the legal profession should pick it up from there. Ultimately, the gumption to stand up before a high court, a division bench, or a full bench and make an argument is really learnt by standing up on your feet. And as much as we can simulate and practice all of this in various contexts, I don't think these are effective proxies, you know. And so I wouldn't overpromise on that. I'll say that really the university system would do well to do the fundamentals, and to make sure that we skill our students with the right kinds of attitudes that will allow them to succeed when they enter the professional environment. Then after that, it's really like over to you. And and we know, as all of us know, that for some students who are very bright in a classroom, the profession doesn't quite work for them. And some students who may not be so, attuned to the classroom, they just fly in the profession. And that's the way the world is. And we should allow for that kind of variation and a division of labor between education and the profession.
It's interesting.
That's very beautifully put, actually.
It's interesting that you speak of humility, because when I speak to so many of my friends and peers who are now at slightly more senior positions at law firms, they often say that they find a lot of the fresh graduates, irrespective of which law school they come from, they're marching in with, a Starbucks coffee cup, thinking they are Harvey Specter or Jessica Wilson, right? And then shortly after, in a week's time, they realize for example, if they're court going, it means they need to wear flats, be in the most comfortable sort of, gear, literally, and then just kind of run between the office and court. And there, their entire myth is very quickly exploded, and humility sort of just sets itself in. So it's interesting.
That's right. And many professionals complained, at least of graduates from my university, that that the sort of the guts and grime of the practice of law puts graduates off, because they think they're walking into a sort of hallowed space, and then they find that all the dysfunctions of our society and our government are also writ large in the court system, and we have to contend with that from day one, and that requires a certain disposition, at the very least, at least an openness to that. And Vikas asked the question, so I'll just spend one more minute on it. This is very tough to teach, because how do you teach attitude? You can only teach attitude and dispositions through the humanities. It's by reading about other lives that you develop dispositions. How else can a university teach it? Of course, we can teach it by example, by the way we conduct ourselves. But that's one part of it. So we can be exemplars if we can be, as flawed as we are. But the other way is to teach this through the humanities. And by reading and thinking about other lives, hopefully we sober our own expectations of life. Very tough job.
Sounds like it.
Talking about tough jobs, I want to move on to the point that you're one of the 20 members and the only Indian on the board comprised, the content oversight board, and that content oversight for Facebook. So how did that come about, and what are you expected to do in that role?
So the oversight board was a decision that Facebook made, I suppose, because of all the controversies and difficulties that it's been caught up in the US after the 2016 election. They thought that they needed a new intervention on content moderation, and hence an independent oversight board. So the independent oversight board was selected through some many-layered process. They had their own search firms. They drew recommendations from across the world. And then the part that I saw was that at some point I got an email and followed up by a phone call asking me to send in a CV and whether I was interested. And then after a series of phone calls, many phone calls later, an offer, and then for the last 8-10 weeks some very careful, deliberate training. And training to do what? Training really to understand the field of content moderation on the internet, and training to think about what it means to deliberate and make good decisions. And both of these have been just fantastic. I mean, great training. Yeah.
So have you spoken to Mark Zuckerberg?
No, that's not part of the job description. and you know, it's interesting, right? It's often referred to in the media as a Facebook oversight board, but by definition, it's independent of Facebook. So that's not part of what we engage with. To the extent we engage with Facebook, it's at a distance, in that we will make some orders and they will have to implement it. But that doesn't start till about September, October.
Okay. And will you also be helping with traction? Because, you know, we would love if we can get a push from you on traction, you know, personal Instagram accounts and all. I'm all ready to be an influencer, you see. So it would be great.
I mean, so there can be many qualifications to be on this oversight board. The one qualification I don't have is that I'm no expert user of Facebook. I kind of know about it, but no one can accuse me of being good at it. Yeah.
Are you on Instagram too? I'm curious.
Sorry?
Are you on Instagram?
Not on Instagram.
Not on Instagram. Okay.
Yeah. So I have to figure that one out. I mean, I kind of know it, but not. I can barely keep
actively on it.
I can barely keep what I have to do going. So I feel like, I mean, as I'm sure most of you who do it well know, that it takes time and effort, right? It's not some, I mean, I have a lot of respect for influencers. So, you know, I mean, clearly they're putting in all that kind of effort to get there.
To promote all these brands and to make some money. Lots of respect. I'm with you.
It's that too. But I'm sure that, you know, people were doing that offline anyway. And I guess this is just one more.
No, I'm just joking. Mine is a case of sour grapes, you know. I recently discovered that there's something called plus size models. I'm like, hello, I've been here all my life. Why hasn't anyone reached out?
So I think you've got to pitch your IG handle in some way. Yeah.
True.
Well, hopefully you won't have to moderate any of our content, no matter what we're saying right now.
No, I think that one of the things, I mean, and more seriously, I mean, I suppose that the oversight board sounds really grand, but what really we'd be doing is doing very few edge cases. So there'd be hard cases. They won't be the standard cases, I think, because by the time it gets filtered through the system, these will be difficult cases. So enough for people to throw stones at us, I think.
Actually, if you're allowed to say, what's your viewpoint on that? Because there is, I mean, you've obviously got the Stop Hate for Profit campaign that's been going pretty aggressive with regards to what organizations like Facebook are doing with content. And obviously there's a kind of cynical move right now. A lot of large advertisers pulling out because of, you know, Facebook content, which doesn't really matter to Facebook. And it may be because of the downturn anyway right now. But what's your viewpoint on where these kind of organizations should cross? There's that barrier between free speech, allow whatever it takes, and actually large scale manipulation at times.
No, I think that the one thing that we can all agree upon is that the idea that there was an early sort of 1990s libertarian idea of free speech on the internet, you know, which is that this anything goes and the market will sort this out. And we don't really need to moderate speech, and, you know, people will follow genuine speech and speech that they value and ignore things that are of less value. I think that idea has essentially now, we should fairly say, been moderated. I think there's a general agreement that the internet as a space, especially social media spaces, need some oversight. I think that recognition exists. So I don't whether it is the Stop Hate and, you know, the campaign that you spoke about. There are also some strong climate change campaigners who have strong views about the place of social media on the questions of climate change and climate change denial and so on and so forth. I think all of this is going to reshape the way the internet is regulated, and my sense, on the whole, for good, because the sort of naive assumption that the answer to bad speech is more speech all the time, and some kind of intuition that good speech crowds out bad speech is something that we're not seeing empirical evidence of. So I think what we can say, all said, is that moderation is here to stay. And moderation is likely to become increasingly important. And these campaigns signal that.
You know, that's almost a whole can of worms we could open up about the whole concept of moderation and who's going to moderate and what's the bias behind moderation. But I think we'll move on to the last question this round, because I mean, that's a great topic, but I think in the essence of time, we'll move on to the next one. So slightly more lighthearted, can you tell us a few some really interesting stories that students you've met in your teaching career so far? Could be inspirational, funny, or just completely wacky.
So let me you gave me a few choices, so I'll go down the inspirational side. Huh? So I have so the one thing about universities like NLS, for sure, is that they can be pretty harsh and highly competitive, sort of pressure cooker places. So very often, by about the second year, third year of the university system, people are not passing courses, or occasionally some people, they don't get promoted from year to year. And these are all, you must remember that almost everyone getting in comes in with a great sense of achievement. And then 1 year or 2 years in, things are not quite working out, and so on and so forth. So it gets difficult. And here's my sense that I have, and I don't want to name people, but I have, there was one particular student who was not even my student in a manner of speaking, but she had not passed the year. She could barely motivate herself to be in the classroom in her second year, and yeah, she had a few courses to complete and was kind of, and I saw the way, and I had the opportunity to engage with her over the next 3 to 6 months, and I saw that very small sorts of nudges and supports make a huge difference. In her case, not only to graduate, but to make it all the way to the top of the UPSC system. And if I recall correctly, within the top 10 or 15 ranks of the UPSC. And the next time, I mean, almost like, I'll be dramatic about it. The next time I see her, she's serving in a foreign office in the US as a very, very accomplished IFS officer. So these kinds of transformations are the rewarding part of being in these university systems. It's quite remarkable to see this, and I suppose that when education works, that's what it does.